A poor girl whispers to the paralyzed billionaire CEO, "It's fake. Stop taking those medicines. Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now?" The winter rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Pharmaceuticals executive suite, 43 stories above the chaos of Manhattan. Alexander Sterling sat motionless in his custom wheelchair, his once athletic frame now confined to the prison of his paralyzed body. At 38, he should have been running marathons, closing billion-dollar deals with a firm handshake, living the life his Princeton degree and ruthless business acumen had built. Instead, he could barely lift a coffee cup without his hands trembling. "Your medication, Mr." Sterling, his executive assistant Victoria, placed the familiar array of pill bottles on his desk with practiced efficiency. Her manicured nails clicked against the glass bottles, 7 different prescriptions, twice daily, without fail. For 18 months, since the mysterious illness had stolen his ability to walk, these pills had been his constant companions. The doctors called it progressive autoimmune polyneuropathy, a rare condition attacking his nervous system. The pills were supposed to slow the progression, to buy him time until they found a cure. They weren't helping. If anything, Alexander felt worse with each passing week. "Thank you, Victoria," he managed, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into his very bones. She nodded curtly and returned to her desk in the outer office, closing the door with a soft click that felt more like a cell door locking. Through the rain-streaked windows, Alexander could see the city sprawling below, a kingdom he'd built through sweat, sacrifice, and an almost pathological drive to succeed. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had revolutionized cancer treatment, made his family name synonymous with innovation, and turned him into one of the youngest billionaires in America. Now, at board meetings, he watched younger executives circle like sharks, waiting for him to show weakness, waiting for the inevitable moment when they could push him aside and claim his empire. He reached for the first bottle, his hand shaking slightly. The corporate clock on his wall showed 10:47 a.m., time for his morning dose. He'd become a slave to these precise schedules, his life measured in pills and appointments rather than achievements and adventures. The door to his private office opened without warning, and Alexander looked up with irritation. Nobody entered without knocking. That was the rule. But it wasn't Victoria or one of his executives. It was a child. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, stood in the doorway. She wore a faded purple jacket over worn jeans, her dark curly hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her brown eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that seemed far too mature for her age. In her small hands she clutched a worn notebook covered in crayon drawings. "How did you—" Alexander began, but the girl walked forward with surprising confidence, her sneakers making soft, squeaking sounds on the marble floor. "You shouldn't take those," she said quietly, pointing at the pills in his hand. Her voice was small but certain, the way children speak when they've discovered something important that adults have missed. Alexander blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. In his world of multi-million-dollar negotiations and corporate warfare, he'd forgotten what it was like to be addressed so directly, so honestly. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Where are your parents?" "My mama cleans your building," the girl said simply. "I'm Emma. I come with her sometimes after school when she works late." She moved closer, her eyes never leaving the pills. "Those pills are making you sick, not better. Sick." And a strange chill ran down Alexander's spine, or at least the memory of what a chill used to feel like before his nerve damage had stolen so many sensations. "These are prescribed by the best doctors in New York," he said, his tone automatically defensive. "They're helping me." Emma shook her head, her curls bouncing. "No, they're not. I've been watching you for 2 months. Every time you take them, you get worse. Your hands shake more. You look more tired. Yesterday you dropped your phone 3 times. Alexander froze. She was right. Yesterday had been particularly bad, his coordination deteriorating to the point where he'd seriously considered cancelling his afternoon meetings. But how could this child possibly have noticed such details, and why was she watching him? Emma, right? He tried to gentle his voice, though it still came out more authoritative than he intended. I appreciate your concern, but medicine is complicated. Sometimes we have to feel worse before we feel better. That's just how healing works. That's what grown-ups always say, when they don't want to listen, Emma replied with the brutal honesty only children possess. She stepped even closer, her small frame barely reaching the height of his wheelchair armrest. But I read a lot. My teacher says I read at a high school level. And I've been in the library every day, learning about medicines and poisons and... Poisons? Alexander's voice sharpened. What are you talking about? Emma's expression turned grave, far too serious for a 7-year-old. The blue pill, the one you take in the morning and at night. I looked at the bottle when the cleaning lady found one that fell under your desk. The label said it was for nerve repair, but when I researched the ingredients... She pulled her notebook from under her arm and flipped it open. The pages were filled with careful, childish handwriting, lists of chemical compounds, notes about side effects, even crude drawings of molecular structures. See, this chemical here, when combined with this other one from your green pills, it creates a neurotoxin, a poison. It's making you paralyzed, not fixing you. Alexander felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath his wheelchair. He stared at the notebook, at the innocent crayon drawings mixed with surprisingly sophisticated medical research, at this impossible child who was saying impossible things. He started, then stopped, because what she was describing wasn't just wrong. It was exactly how he felt, like something was actively attacking his system rather than repairing it. That's a very serious accusation. I know, Emma said softly. But I'm right. I know I'm right. Please, Mr. Sterling, just stop taking them for a few days. See if you feel better. If I'm wrong, you can start again. But if I'm right... Her voice dropped to a whisper. If I'm right, someone is trying to hurt you on purpose. The rain intensified outside, thunder rumbling in the distance. Alexander looked at the pills in his hand, then at the child in front of him. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was ridiculous, taking medical advice from a 7-year-old girl whose mother cleaned toilets. It was insane. It was beneath him. It was. But what if she was right? Emma! A woman's voice called from the hallway, panic clear in her tone. Emma, where did you go? I'm so sorry, mister. Sterling, she must have wandered off while I was... A woman in her early 30s rushed into the office, wearing the grey uniform of the building's cleaning staff. Her face was flushed with embarrassment and fear. The fear of someone who knows their job hangs by a thread, and their child has just crossed an uncrossable line. Mrs. Alexander prompted. Martinez! Rosa Martinez! I'm so sorry, sir. Emma knows she's not supposed to bother the executives. She usually stays in the break room doing her homework while I work, but It's fine, Alexander said, surprising himself. He looked at Emma, who was being pulled back by her mortified mother. The girl's eyes met his, pleading and certain all at once. She was just showing me her notebook. Very impressive work for someone her age. Rosa Martinez looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She's always reading, that one. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Come on, Mija, we need to let Mr. Sterling work. Emma allowed herself to be led toward the door, but at the threshold she turned back. Please, she said one more time, just think about it. Please. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut, and Alexander was alone with the rain and his pills, and a thought he couldn't shake. What if she's right? He sat there for a long moment, the pills growing warm in his palm. 7 prescriptions, 7 different doctors, 18 months of steady decline, and a 7-year-old girl with a crayon notebook claiming it was all poison. Alexander Sterling hadn't built an empire by ignoring his instincts. Something about the absolute certainty in Emma's voice, the detailed research in her childish handwriting, the way she'd observed him for 2 months without anyone noticing. It resonated with something deep in his gut. He looked at the pills again. Then, in a decision that surprised even himself, he opened his desk drawer and swept all 7 bottles inside, closing it with a definitive click. For the first time in 18 months, Alexander Sterling would not take his medication. The rain continued to fall as he turned his wheelchair toward the window, watching the city lights blur through the water-streaked glass. Somewhere in this building, a cleaning woman was probably scolding her daughter for speaking out of turn, for bothering important people, for imagining things that couldn't possibly be true. But Alexander had built his fortune on seeing patterns others missed, on trusting unlikely sources of information, on taking calculated risks when everyone else played it safe. If Emma Martinez was right, if someone really was poisoning him, then he had just made the most important decision of his life, and if she was wrong, well, at this point, what did he really have to lose? His hands had stopped shaking, he realized, or maybe he was just imagining it, the power of suggestion working its magic. But as he sat there in his tower above the city, Alexander Sterling felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Hope, and the beginning of questions that would unravel everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and who really held the knife aimed at his back. The clock ticked toward 11 a.m. Outside his door, Victoria would be wondering why he hadn't called for his mid-morning coffee. In the boardroom 3 floors down, executives were plotting his downfall, waiting for the day his illness would finally force him to step aside. And somewhere in the building's lower levels, a little girl with too much intelligence and too little reason to lie was probably being told to never, ever speak to the boss again. Alexander reached for his phone, his finger hovering over the button that would summon his head of security. He could have Emma and her mother investigated, find out why this child was really approaching him, uncover whatever game was being played. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the memory of those serious brown eyes, looking at him not with pity or opportunism, but with genuine concern. He put the phone down and turned back to his computer, pulling up the digital records of his medical treatments. If someone was poisoning him, there would be evidence, patterns in the prescriptions, connections between the doctors, something that would either prove Emma's impossible theory or reveal her as a child with an overactive imagination and too much access to the internet. The rain drummed on. The city sprawled below. And in a tower built on certainty and control, Alexander Sterling began to entertain the most dangerous thought of all. What if the person he trusted most was the one trying to kill him? 3 days later, Alexander Sterling woke up and realized something extraordinary. His fingers weren't trembling when he reached for his phone. It was 6:17 a.m., and pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains of his penthouse bedroom. For the first time in months, he'd slept through the night without waking in pain, without the muscle spasms that usually jolted him awake every few hours. His head felt clearer, the persistent fog that had clouded his thoughts lifting like morning mist. He stared at his hands, turning them over slowly. The tremors that had become his constant companion, the ones that made signing documents an exercise in humiliation that forced him to use voice-to-text for most correspondence, were noticeably reduced. Not gone, but better, significantly better. A 7-year-old girl had been right. The realization sent a cold wave of fury through his chest. If Emma Martinez was correct about the medication, then someone had been systematically poisoning him for 18 months. Someone he trusted. Someone who had access to his doctors, his prescriptions, his daily routine. Someone who wanted him either dead or so debilitated that he'd be forced to step down from his own company. Alexander maneuvered his wheelchair to the bathroom with practiced efficiency, noting how his coordination seemed sharper, his reactions quicker. The improvement was subtle but undeniable. 3 days without medication, and his body was already beginning to recover, which meant Emma's theory about the neurotoxin wasn't just plausible, it was demonstrably true. By 8:30 a.m., Alexander was at his desk in the Sterling Pharmaceuticals Tower, running a private background check on every doctor who'd treated him over the past 2 years. He'd called in favors, bypassed his usual security team, and hired an independent investigator from outside his normal network. If there was a conspiracy, he couldn't trust anyone inside his immediate circle. "Mr. Sterling?" Victoria's voice came through the intercom, making him jump. "Your 9:00 a.m. meeting with the board is in 20 minutes. Should I bring your medication first?" Alexander's jaw tightened. Victoria. His executive assistant for 6 years. The woman who knew his schedule better than he did, who managed every aspect of his professional life with ruthless efficiency. She'd been the one bringing him his pills twice daily for 18 months, never missing a dose, always perfectly punctual. "That won't be necessary," he said carefully. "I'm trying a different treatment protocol, doctor's orders." A pause. Had he imagined the slight edge of concern in that silence? "Of course, Mr. Sterling. Shall I reschedule with Dr. Harding for this week?" "No, I'll handle my medical appointments personally from now on." He kept his voice neutral, professional. If someone was watching him, monitoring his routine for signs of recovery, he needed to play this carefully. "Just send in the board meeting notes." "Right away, sir." The line clicked off, and Alexander sat back in his wheelchair, his mind racing. Dr. Harding, his primary neurologist, the one who'd diagnosed him initially and coordinated all his treatments. The man had impeccable credentials: Johns Hopkins, Harvard Medical, 20 years of experience with autoimmune disorders. He'd been recommended by. Alexander pulled up his files, scrolling through the digital records. Dr. Harding had been recommended by his CFO, Marcus Webb, who'd mentioned that his sister had a similar condition, and found Dr. Harding exceptionally helpful. Marcus Webb, his chief financial officer for 8 years, the man who'd helped him navigate 3 major acquisitions and a hostile takeover attempt. Marcus, who stood to gain a significant promotion if Alexander stepped down as CEO. Marcus, whose sister's similar condition Alexander had never actually verified. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and Alexander didn't like what he was seeing. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Victoria with the meeting files. Instead, Rosa Martinez entered, pushing her cleaning cart with visible nervousness. She was early. The executive suites weren't usually cleaned until after business hours. Behind her, trying to look invisible, was Emma. "Mr. Sterling," Rosa began, her English heavily accented and apologetic. "I'm so sorry to disturb you, Emma. Rosa gestured helplessly at her daughter. "She's been asking every day if you're okay. She wouldn't stop worrying. I told her we can't bother you, but she insisted." "It's fine, Mrs. Martinez." Alexander surprised himself with how much he meant it. He looked at Emma, who was clutching that same worn notebook, her brown eyes fixed on him with intense scrutiny. "Actually, I'm glad you're here." Emma took a tentative step forward, her mother's hand on her shoulder like a safety tether. "You stop taking them," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see it in his face, in the way he sat straighter, in the steady hands resting on his wheelchair armrests. "You feel better?" "I do," Alexander admitted. "You were right, Emma. About the medication. About—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "About someone possibly wanting to hurt me." Rosa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dios mío, who would—" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Alexander wheeled closer to Emma, bringing himself to her eye level. "Emma, you said you've been watching me for 2 months. Have you noticed anything else unusual?" Anyone who pays special attention to my medication, anyone who seems too interested in how I'm feeling." Emma nodded slowly, her expression turning thoughtful. She flipped open her notebook, revealing pages of observations written in careful, childish handwriting. "The tall lady with blonde hair, the one who sits outside your office. She always makes sure you take your pills. She watches you swallow them. Once, when you didn't take them right away because you were on the phone, she came back 3 times to remind you." "Victoria, of course. And there's a man," Emma continued, "older, with grey hair and expensive suits. He comes to see you every Thursday at 3 p.m. After he leaves, you always look more tired. Last Thursday I saw him talking to the blonde lady in the hallway. They were looking at something on a phone, and when I walked past with Mama's cart, they stopped talking really fast, like they didn't want anyone to hear." Marcus Webb meeting with Victoria. About what? Alexander felt his pulse quicken. "Emma, this is very important. Do you remember anything else they said? Anything at all?" Emma bit her lip, concentrating. "The lady said something like, 'How much longer?' And the man said, 'Be patient. The dosage increase should accelerate things.' Then they saw me and stopped." "Dosage increase?" "Accelerate things. They were talking about killing him, and they were impatient about how long it was taking." "Mr. Sterling," Rosa said nervously, "should we call the police? If someone is trying to hurt you—" "No." Alexander's response was sharp, immediate. "Not yet. I have no proof, just observations from—" He stopped himself before saying, "just a child." Emma had earned more respect than that. "Just preliminary evidence. I need to gather more information before I can make accusations against people in my company." He looked at Emma again, this brilliant, observant 7-year-old who'd saved his life simply by paying attention when everyone else looked away. "Emma, can I ask you for help? Just for a little while longer?" Rosa started to protest, but Emma's face lit up with purpose. "You want me to keep watching them?" I want you to keep being invisible," Alexander said. "People don't notice cleaning staff, and they definitely don't notice the cleaning staff's children. You can go places, hear things that I can't. But," he added firmly, "you have to be careful. If these people are willing to poison me, they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." "Ooh." "Emma is 7 years old," Rosa said, her voice strained. "She shouldn't be involved in something dangerous like this." "You're right." Alexander met Rosa's eyes. "And I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. But Emma already is involved. She made herself involved when she warned me. And honestly, Mrs. Martinez, your daughter might be the only person in this entire building I can trust right now." The words hung in the air, heavy with their implications. A billionaire CEO admitting that his only ally was a child he'd met 4 days ago. Emma looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. "Mama, I can help. I'll be careful, I promise. I won't let them see me watching." Rosa closed her eyes, and Alexander could see the war happening behind her expression, the immigrant mother's instinct to protect her child at all costs, versus the impossible position of being asked directly for help by a man who could change their lives with a word. Finally she nodded. "Only watching. No talking to these people. No taking risks. Entiendes?" "I understand," Emma said solemnly. Alexander reached for his desk drawer, pulling out a business card and a pen. His hand barely shook as he wrote a number on the back. "This is my private cell phone. The one that doesn't go through Victoria. If you see or hear anything important, have your mother call this number, any time, day or night." Rosa took the card like it was made of gold, tucking it carefully into her uniform pocket. "One more thing," Alexander said. "Don't change your routine. Come to work at the same times. Act exactly as you have been. If anyone asks about Emma talking to me, we were discussing her schoolwork. I was impressed by her reading level and offered to donate some books to her school. Nothing more." "Yes, sir," Rosa said quietly. "Come on, Mija. We need to let Mr. Sterling work. Emma lingered for just a moment, her eyes meeting Alexander's. "Be careful," she whispered. "If they notice you're getting better, they might try something else." Smart kid, terrifyingly smart. After they left, Alexander sat in his office as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the city below from grey to gold. His 9 a.m. board meeting started in 5 minutes, but he needed these moments to compose himself, to prepare the performance he'd have to give. He needed to appear sick, deteriorating, right on schedule for someone being slowly poisoned to death. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 18 months trying to hide his weakness, and now he'd have to fake it. But if Victoria and Marcus suspected he was recovering, they'd either increase the dosage through some other means, or, as Emma had warned, try something more direct. Alexander wheeled himself to the private bathroom attached to his office and studied his reflection. 3 days of recovery had brightened his eyes, brought colour back to his complexion. He looked healthier, alert. That wouldn't do. He splashed cold water on his face, deliberately triggering a flush that would mimic exhaustion. He mussed his hair slightly, letting it fall less perfectly than Victoria usually styled it. He practiced the tremor in his hands, the slight slur in his speech that had become second nature during his illness. A knock at the door. "Mr. Sterling, the board is ready for you." Victoria's voice. Sweet, professional, poisonous. "Coming," he called, injecting just the right amount of weariness into his tone. As Alexander wheeled himself toward the boardroom, he thought about Emma Martinez, 7 years old, daughter of a cleaning woman, armed with nothing but a notebook full of crayon drawings and a mind that saw patterns everyone else missed. She'd saved his life. Now he had to save his own, and maybe, just maybe, figure out how to repay a debt he could never truly settle. The boardroom doors opened, and Alexander rolled inside to face the viper's nest, wearing a mask of weakness while his mind sharpened like a blade. Marcus Webb looked up from the head of the table, his smile warm and concerned, and utterly false. "Alexander, you look exhausted. Perhaps we should reschedule. Your health has to come first." "I'm fine," Alexander said, letting his hand shake visibly as he reached for the water glass Victoria had placed at his seat. "Let's get started. I have a lot of work to do." Behind him, he heard the door close with a soft click that sounded like the closing of a trap. But for the first time in 18 months, Alexander Sterling was the one setting the snare. And he had the most unlikely ally imaginable watching his back. A 7-year-old girl with too much intelligence and a heart brave enough to speak truth to power. 1 week after Alexander stopped taking his medication, Emma Martinez made a discovery that changed everything. It was Thursday afternoon, 2:47 p.m., and Emma sat cross-legged in the corner of the executive floor break room, her homework spread across the small table. To anyone passing by, she was just another invisible child, waiting for her mother to finish work. Nobody noticed that her math worksheet had been on the same problem for 20 minutes, or that her eyes kept flicking to the hallway beyond the glass door. She was watching, always watching. Marcus Webb emerged from the elevator at exactly 2:52 p.m., 8 minutes early, for his usual 3 p.m. meeting with Mr. Sterling. Emma had learned his patterns over the past week. He always arrived early, always stopped at Victoria's desk for a brief conversation, always carried the same leather portfolio. But today was different. Today, Marcus didn't go to Victoria's desk. Instead, he turned left, toward the executive bathroom, the private one that only senior management could access. Emma watched as he glanced around quickly, then slipped inside. Something about the furtive movement made Emma's instincts ping. Mr. Sterling had taught her that word, furtive. It meant sneaky, guilty. She carefully closed her math book, standing up and stretching as if bored. Her mother was working 3 floors down. Nobody was paying attention to a 7-year-old girl wandering the hallways. Emma walked toward the bathroom, her heart pounding. She couldn't go inside. It was a men's room, and she'd get in trouble. But there was a supply closet right next to it, one her mother used to store cleaning materials. The walls were thin, if she was quiet enough. She slipped into the closet, leaving the door open just a crack, and held her breath. Through the wall, she heard water running. Then Marcus's voice, low and urgent. "It's Webb. We have a problem." Silence. "He was on the phone. He's not taking the medication anymore. Victoria says he's been refusing it for over a week, claiming doctor's orders." A pause. "No, I already checked with Harding. He didn't authorize any changes." Emma's hands gripped her notebook so tightly, her knuckles turned white. This was it. This was proof. "Listen to me," Marcus continued, his voice hardening. "If Sterling's stopping the treatment, he either suspects something or he's getting better on his own. Either way, we're running out of time. The board vote is in 3 weeks. We need him either dead or completely incapacitated before then." Dead. The word hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd known they were hurting Mr. Sterling, but hearing someone say it so casually, so coldly. "I don't care how you do it," Marcus said, "but it needs to look natural. An accident, a sudden deterioration, something that can't be traced back to us." Another pause. "Yes, Victoria's on board. She's been pushing harder for him to take the pills, but he's not buying it anymore. We might need to try a different approach." Emma heard footsteps approaching the closet. She pressed herself against the back wall, behind a stack of paper towel boxes, her heart hammering so loud she was sure Marcus would hear it. The bathroom door opened and closed. Marcus's expensive shoes clicked past the supply closet, moving toward the elevators. Emma waited, counting to 100 like her mother had taught her when learning patience, before emerging. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out the phone her mother had given her for emergencies, an old flip phone with scratched plastic casing. She dialed the number written on the back of Mr. Sterling's business card. He answered on the first ring. "Emma?" "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I heard Mr. Webb on the phone. He said they need you dead before some board vote in 3 weeks. He said it has to look like an accident." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Emma thought the connection had dropped. Finally, "Where are you right now?" "Supply closet, 43rd floor, but he's gone now, heading to your office. Stay there, don't move. I'll call you back in 5 minutes." The line went dead. Emma sat in the darkness of the closet, surrounded by cleaning supplies and the sharp smell of disinfectant, and tried not to cry. She was 7 years old. She should be worrying about spelling tests and playground games, not murder plots and corporate conspiracies. But then she thought about Mr. Sterling, how he'd looked at her not with dismissal, but with respect, how he'd asked for her help instead of sending her away, how his hands had stopped shaking because she'd been brave enough to speak up. Some adults forgot that children could see things, understand things, matter in important ways. Mr. Sterling hadn't forgotten, and Emma wasn't going to let him down. Her phone buzzed. "Emma, listen carefully. I need you to do something for me, but only if you feel safe doing it." "Okay," Emma whispered. "Marcus is in my office right now for our weekly meeting. His phone is in his jacket pocket, which he always hangs on my coat rack. If you could get to my office, could you check what number he just called? There should be a recent call in his log." Emma's mind raced. It was risky, but... "Your assistant, the blonde lady, will she be at her desk?" "Victoria steps away every Thursday at 3:10 p.m. for exactly 15 minutes. She thinks I don't notice, but she's like clockwork. She's having an affair with someone in accounting, and that's when they meet." Alexander's voice was grim. "If you're going to do this, you have a 7-minute window starting at 3:10. But Emma, if it feels dangerous at all, don't do it. This is not worth you getting hurt." Emma checked the time on her phone, 3:08 p.m. Her mother's words echoed in her head. Only watching. No taking risks. But this wasn't watching anymore. This was action. This was important. "I'll be careful," she promised. At 3:10 p.m. precisely, Victoria stood up from her desk, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the elevators. Emma counted to 30, then emerged from the supply closet and moved down the hallway with the practiced invisibility of children who've learned to navigate adult spaces. The outer office was empty. Through the glass wall of the inner office, she could see Mr. Sterling and Marcus Webb sitting across from each other, deep in conversation. Marcus's expensive charcoal suit jacket hung on the coat rack, just as Mr. Sterling had said. Emma's hands were sweating as she approached. What if someone saw her? What if Mr. Webb turned around? What if... No time for what-ifs. She reached into the jacket pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out an iPhone in a sleek black case. Her own mother's flip phone was ancient compared to this, but Emma had used smartphones at school. She pressed the button and the screen lit up, unlocked. Adults were so careless sometimes. She tapped the phone icon and found the recent calls. The last number Marcus had dialed was listed simply as D. Harding. D. Harding. Dr. Harding, Mr. Sterling's neurologist. Emma's stomach dropped. The doctor who was supposed to be helping Mr. Sterling was part of the conspiracy. The man who'd diagnosed him, who'd prescribed the poison disguised as medicine, who'd probably been paid to slowly kill his patient. She memorized the number, put the phone back exactly as she'd found it, and slipped out of the office just as the elevator dinged down the hallway. Victoria was returning early. Emma ducked into the ladies' room and locked herself in a stall, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. She pulled out her flip phone and quickly typed the number into a text message to Mr. Sterling's private line, along with 2 words, Dr. Harding. Then she sat on the closed toilet seat and tried to catch her breath, tried to process what she'd just learned. The conspiracy went deeper than they'd thought. It wasn't just Victoria and Marcus. It was the doctor too. How many others were involved? How far did this treachery extend? When Emma finally emerged, her mother was waiting outside the bathroom, worry etched across her face. "Mija, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere." "I'm sorry, Mama, I was just using the bathroom." Rosa studied her daughter's face, seeing something there that made her own expression soften with understanding. "You found something." It wasn't a question. Emma nodded. "Come," Rosa said quietly, taking her daughter's hand. "Let's finish work and go home. Some things are too big for little girls to carry alone." But as they walked toward the service elevator, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Sterling. "Thank you. You may have just saved my life." Again. And Emma realized something important. Maybe she was little, and maybe this was too big. But she wasn't alone. She had her mother, who was braver than anyone gave her credit for. She had Mr. Sterling, who trusted her when no one else would, and she had herself, 7 years old, armed with a notebook and courage that adults had forgotten how to summon. That evening, as Emma sat at the tiny kitchen table in their apartment doing homework, her mother's phone rang. Rosa answered, listened, then handed it to Emma with a serious expression. "Emma," Mr. Sterling's voice came through, different somehow, younger, more energized. "I need to tell you something. I've been doing my own investigation, and with what you discovered today, I finally have enough evidence to move forward. But it's going to get dangerous. These people are desperate, and desperate people do desperate things." "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, her crayon pausing over her spelling words. "I'm going to set a trap," Alexander said. "But first, I need to thank you properly. You've helped me more than you could possibly understand. You've given me my life back, Emma. How can I ever repay that?" Emma thought about their tiny apartment, about her mother working 2 jobs, about the way other kids at school got new backpacks and field trip money while Emma wore hand-me-downs and stayed behind. She thought about all the things she could ask for. Money, toys, opportunities, but what she said was, "Just promise me you'll be safe, and that you won't forget about people like me and my mama when this is over." We're invisible to most rich people. Don't let us be invisible to you." The silence on the other end was long and heavy. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I promise, Emma, on everything I have, I promise." After she hung up, Emma returned to her homework, but her mind was elsewhere. In her notebook, hidden between pages of vocabulary words and math problems, she'd started a new page titled "The Truth About Mr. Sterling." She was documenting everything, every observation, every overheard conversation, every pattern she'd noticed. Because Emma Martinez was 7 years old, but she was also the only person who'd seen through a conspiracy that had fooled everyone else. And if something happened to Mr. Sterling, if the bad people won, someone needed to know the truth. Someone needed to remember that a little girl had tried to save a billionaire's life, and that courage didn't come from boardrooms and bank accounts. It came from paying attention. It came from speaking up even when no one wanted to listen. It came from believing that even the smallest voice could change everything. Across the city, in his penthouse apartment, Alexander Sterling sat at his desk with a chessboard in front of him. He'd been playing chess since he was Emma's age, learning strategy and sacrifice and the long game of patience. Now he was facing the most important match of his life, and his opponents had already shown their hand. They wanted him dead. They wanted his company. They wanted everything he'd built, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated a 7-year-old girl with a notebook full of crayon drawings. Alexander moved his knight into position, a smile playing at his lips. In 3 weeks, there would be a board vote that Marcus Webb expected to win by default, assuming Alexander would either be dead or too incapacitated to fight. Instead, Alexander would be there, healthy, armed with evidence, ready to burn down everyone who'd betrayed him. And when it was over, when the truth came out and the guilty were punished, he would keep his promise to Emma Martinez. He would remember that real intelligence wasn't taught at Princeton or Harvard. Sometimes it came from a child who'd learned to be invisible and then chose to be seen at exactly the right moment. The rain began to fall again outside Alexander's windows, washing the city clean. But this time, the sound didn't feel melancholy. It felt like anticipation. The storm was coming, and Alexander Sterling was ready. 12 days after Alexander stopped taking his medication, he could walk again. Not perfectly. His legs were still weak, his balance uncertain, the months of paralysis leaving their mark. But with the help of a cane and sheer determination, Alexander Sterling took his first steps in 18 months in the privacy of his penthouse at 3 a.m. when no one could see him stumble, fall, and rise again. He was recovering. And that recovery was both his greatest weapon and his greatest danger. "You need to be careful," Emma had told him during their secret phone call that evening. She'd started calling every night after her mother went to bed, whispering updates and observations from the safety of her bedroom closet. "Victoria asked the building manager about installing a camera in your office. She said it was for security, but Mama heard her talking about wanting to monitor his condition more closely." Translation: they were getting suspicious. They were getting desperate. Alexander stood in his home gym, gripping the parallel bars as sweat dripped down his face, forcing his reluctant muscles to remember how to work. 2 weeks until the board vote. 2 weeks to gather ironclad evidence, expose the conspiracy, and reclaim his company before Marcus Webb could convince the board that Alexander was too ill to continue as CEO. The problem was, gathering evidence required lawyers, investigators, people Alexander could trust. And the list of people he trusted had shrunk to exactly 3. A 7-year-old girl, her cleaning lady mother, and his childhood friend David Chen, who lived in San Francisco and knew nothing about pharmaceuticals or corporate law. It wasn't much of an army to fight a war. His phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator, the one he'd hired outside his normal channels, paying cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. The message was short, but devastating. Webb has 5 board members in his pocket. They're planning a vote of no confidence, regardless of your health status. This isn't just about the poison, it's a full takeover. Alexander sank onto the weight bench, his legs trembling from exertion. Of course, the poisoning wasn't just about removing him, it was about making him look incompetent, unstable, unfit to lead. Even if he recovered, even if he exposed the conspiracy, Marcus had been systematically turning the board against him for months, maybe years. Another text came through, this one from Emma. Mr. Webb came by tonight. Late. He talked to Victoria in her office for a long time. When they came out, she looked scared. He looked angry. Mama says they kept saying something about accelerating the timeline. What does that mean? Alexander's blood ran cold. Accelerating the timeline meant they were done waiting. Whatever they'd planned for 2 weeks from now, they were moving it up. His fingers flew across his phone. Emma, I need you and your mother to stay away from the office tomorrow. Call in sick. Don't come in until I tell you it's safe. The response came quickly. Why? What's happening? They're going to make their move, and I need to be ready. 3 floors below Alexander's penthouse, in a luxury apartment paid for with embezzled Sterling Pharmaceuticals funds, Marcus Webb poured himself a scotch and stared at the financial projections on his laptop. Once Alexander was gone and Marcus assumed control as interim CEO, he'd have access to the company's offshore accounts, the research patents worth billions, and the political connections that made Sterling Pharmaceuticals untouchable. But the plan was falling apart. Alexander wasn't dying. He wasn't even deteriorating anymore. If anything, Victoria reported he seemed sharper, more focused. He'd stopped taking his medication, and despite Dr. Harding's best efforts to convince him to resume treatment, Alexander had refused all medical advice. The poisoning had failed, which left only one option. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed. It's me. We need to move up the timeline. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow? Dr. Harding's voice was sharp with concern. That's too soon. We haven't prepared. We're out of time. Sterling's recovering, which means he either figured out the medication was compromised or he got lucky. Either way, we can't risk him going public with suspicions. Marcus's voice hardened. I've arranged for his wheelchair to have a mechanical failure tomorrow evening. He usually works late on Fridays. The building will be mostly empty. A tragic accident, a faulty brake system, a terrible fall down the emergency stairwell. That's not subtle, Marcus. People will ask questions. Let them ask. A paralyzed man in a faulty wheelchair having an accident is tragic but plausible. Besides, by the time any investigation concludes, I'll have already assumed control and buried any evidence that doesn't support our narrative. Silence on the line. Then, what about Victoria? She's getting cold feet. Victoria will do what she's told, or she'll go down with the rest of us. She's in too deep to back out now. Marcus finished his scotch, feeling the burn of alcohol and ambition in his throat. Tomorrow night. This ends, one way or another. Until Friday morning arrived grey and cold, matching Alexander's mood as he wheeled himself into Sterling Pharmaceuticals at 7:30 a.m. He'd spent the night preparing, gathering evidence, making contingency plans. If Marcus was going to make a move, Alexander needed to be ready, but he wasn't ready for what he found. His office had been ransacked. Not obviously. Someone had been careful, professional, but Alexander knew every inch of his workspace, and he could see the signs. Drawers slightly askew, files rearranged, his computer showing signs of unauthorized access. Someone had searched his office during the night, looking for something, looking for evidence that he suspected the conspiracy. Mr. Sterling? Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expression one of manufactured concern. Is everything all right? You look pale. Alexander forced himself to look weak, shaky. I'm fine, just tired. Long night. Maybe you should take the day off. Rest at home. Victoria stepped closer, her perfume expensive and cloying. You've been pushing yourself too hard. Dr. Harding called yesterday, very concerned that you're not following his treatment protocol. I'll be fine. Alexander met her eyes, searching for any hint of conscience, any regret for what she was planning. He found nothing but cold calculation. Actually, I need to review some financial reports. I'll be working late tonight. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, fear. She recovered quickly. Of course. I'll make sure security knows you're staying late, for safety purposes. For safety purposes. Right. As the day progressed, Alexander felt the walls closing in. Marcus appeared at 11 a.m. for an impromptu meeting, his smile friendly and his questions probing. Was Alexander feeling well? Had he reconsidered Dr. Harding's recommendations? Was he planning to attend next week's board meeting in person? Each question was a probe, testing Alexander's defenses, measuring his strength. At 4:30 p.m., most of the staff began filtering out for the weekend. By 6 p.m., the executive floor was nearly empty. By 7 p.m., Alexander was alone, or so it seemed. He sat in his office, watching the security camera feeds on his computer, waiting. At 7:34 p.m., he saw Marcus Webb enter the building through the parking garage, using his executive keycard. At 7:41 p.m., Victoria's car pulled into her reserved spot, despite the fact that she'd supposedly left hours ago. They were here, and they weren't here for a meeting. Alexander reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the small recording device his investigator had provided. Whatever happened next, he needed evidence. He needed proof. At 7:52 p.m., his office door opened. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to maintain his friendly facade. Working late, Alexander? Just catching up on some files. Alexander kept his voice steady, his hands resting casually on his wheelchair armrests. I didn't expect to see you tonight. No, I imagine you didn't. Marcus stepped inside, and Victoria appeared behind him, closing the door. Her face was white, her hands trembling. We need to have a conversation about your future with this company. My future? Alexander raised an eyebrow. I wasn't aware my future was up for discussion. Everything's up for discussion when you're dying, Alexander. Marcus moved closer, his expression hardening. Dr. Harding says your condition is terminal, 6 months, maybe less. The board needs to start planning for succession, and frankly, your erratic behavior lately, refusing treatment, missing doses, acting paranoid, suggests you're no longer capable of leading this company. So that was their angle. Paint him as mentally unstable, physically failing, a liability rather than a leader. I see. Alexander's mind raced. And let me guess, you've graciously offered to step in as interim CEO until a permanent replacement can be found. Someone has to. Marcus's smile was thin and cold. This company is too important to let it fall apart because its founder is too stubborn to admit he's dying. Interesting theory. Alexander reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. But what if I told you I'm not dying? What if I told you I've been recovering ever since I stopped taking the medication you and Dr. Harding have been using to poison me for the past 18 months? The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus's face went blank, carefully neutral. That's a serious accusation, Alexander. Paranoid, even. Perhaps your condition is affecting your judgment more than we realized. Perhaps. Alexander rolled his wheelchair backward slightly, positioning himself near his desk. Or perhaps I have phone records showing your calls to Dr. Harding. Perhaps I have testimony from witnesses who overheard your conversations about accelerating the timeline. Well, perhaps I have toxicology reports showing exactly what chemicals were in my medication and how they were designed to mimic autoimmune disease while actually causing nerve damage. Marcus's jaw clenched. You're bluffing. Am I? Alexander held up the flash drive. Everything's on here, every phone call, every payment, every coordination between you, Victoria, and Dr. Harding. I've already sent copies to my lawyer, to the SEC, and to a journalist friend who's very interested in corporate poisoning cases. It was a bluff. Alexander had evidence, but not everything he'd claimed. But he'd learned in business that sometimes the illusion of power was as effective as power itself. Marcus pulled out his phone. "Then I guess we're done pretending." He made a call. Now. The office lights cut out, plunging them into darkness, illuminated only by the city glow through the windows. Alexander heard the electronic lock on his office door engage with a heavy click. "You see, Alexander," Marcus said from somewhere in the darkness, "I planned for the possibility that you'd figure it out. That's why I had a backup plan, a tragic accident. A paralyzed CEO working alone late at night, a wheelchair malfunction, a terrible fall. So tragic, so preventable." Alexander's heart hammered. This was it. They were done with subtlety, done with slow poison. They were going to kill him tonight in his own office and make it look like an accident. But Alexander Sterling hadn't built an empire by being unprepared. Looking for this? Alexander's voice came from a different part of the room. He'd moved in the darkness, abandoning the wheelchair that Marcus expected him to be trapped in. Because Alexander could walk now. Not well, not far, but enough. Emergency lights flickered on. Not the office lights, but the battery-powered security lights Alexander had installed himself 3 days ago. In their harsh glow, Marcus and Victoria could see Alexander standing near his desk, leaning heavily on his cane, but standing. "You can walk," Victoria whispered, her face crumbling. "Oh God, you can walk." "I can do more than that." Alexander pressed a button on his desk, and the office door unlocked. "I can bring you both to justice." The door burst open, and suddenly the office was full of people. Building security, police officers, and at the front of the group, a small figure with curly hair and a worn notebook. Emma Martinez looked at Marcus Webb with the righteous fury of a child who'd seen too much injustice. "I told you," she said simply. "I told you he'd figure it out." Marcus lunged for Alexander, but security was faster, restraining him as he shouted threats and denials. Victoria collapsed into a chair, crying, already begging for a deal. Alexander watched as they were led away in handcuffs, 18 months of pain and betrayal, finally culminating in justice. Then he looked at Emma, this impossible 7-year-old girl who'd saved his life, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope for humanity. "How did you know to call the police?" he asked softly. Emma held up her phone, her mother's old flip phone with the scratched screen. "You told me to stay away today, but I figured if they were going to try something bad, you'd need help. So Mama and I came anyway. We were hiding in the supply closet, listening. When the lights went out, I called 911 and told them someone was trying to hurt you." Behind her, Rosa Martinez stood in the doorway, her cleaning uniform replaced with regular clothes, her expression fierce with protective love for her daughter. "She insisted," Rosa said she couldn't let you face them alone." Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. A 7-year-old girl and her mother, armed with nothing but courage and a cell phone, had been his last line of defense against murderers. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more deeply than any words could express. "Both of you. Thank you." Emma walked over to him and, without asking permission, wrapped her small arms around his waist in a hug. "You promised you'd be safe," she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "You promised." "I kept my promise," Alexander said softly, returning the hug. "Because you helped me. Because you were brave enough to speak up when everyone else stayed silent." As the police finished their work and the office began to empty, Alexander stood in his office, stood on his own 2 feet, with a cane for support but standing nonetheless, and looked at the city spread out below. Somewhere out there, Dr. Harding was probably already on a plane to a country without extradition treaties. But they'd find him eventually, Justice might be slow, but it was coming. The board meeting was still scheduled for next week. But now it would be very different from what Marcus had planned. Now it would be Alexander exposing the conspiracy, cleaning house, and rebuilding a company that had almost been stolen from him. And it was all because a 7-year-old girl had noticed something that everyone else had missed. The week following Marcus Webb's arrest was chaos. The media descended on Sterling Pharmaceuticals like locusts, hungry for every detail of the corporate poisoning scandal. Alexander spent hours with lawyers, federal investigators, and journalists, carefully controlling the narrative while protecting Emma and Rosa from unwanted attention. Emma Martinez, 7-year-old hero, was already getting interview requests from national news outlets. Alexander had his legal team shut down every single one. Emma deserved privacy, safety, and a chance to be a child, not a media spectacle. On Tuesday morning, 5 days before the rescheduled board meeting, Alexander sat in his office and finally told Emma the full truth. "Your mother's job is safe forever," he said, as Emma sat across from him, her notebook open to a page filled with observations about the case. "I've set up a trust fund for your education. Full scholarship to any school you want, from elementary through university. And I'm offering your mother a position as head of facilities management, with a salary 10 times what she makes now." Rosa, sitting beside her daughter, had tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Sterling, that's too much. We don't need—" "Yes, you do," Alexander interrupted gently. "And I need you to understand something, Mrs. Martinez. Emma didn't just save my life. She showed me that I'd become the kind of person who didn't notice the invisible people in my own building. The cleaners, the security guards, the support staff who make everything run. I'd stopped seeing them as people. Your daughter reminded me that everyone matters. That courage and intelligence have nothing to do with bank accounts." He turned to Emma. "I'm also starting a foundation, the Emma Martinez Foundation for Overlooked Brilliance. It will identify and support exceptionally bright children from low-income families, providing them with resources, mentorship, and opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. You'll be the inspiration, but you won't have to do anything you don't want to do. I just want other kids like you to have the chances you deserve." Emma stared at him, her brown eyes wide. "A whole foundation named after me? You saved a life by paying attention. Imagine how many lives could be changed if we helped more children like you develop their gifts." Alexander smiled. "What do you think?" Emma looked at her mother, who nodded through her tears. Then Emma grinned, the first truly carefree, childlike expression Alexander had seen on her face. "I think that's really cool." Wednesday brought a revelation that shook Alexander to his core. His investigator had finally traced the full extent of the conspiracy, and it went further than anyone had imagined. Dr. Harding had been recruited by Marcus Webb 3 years ago, long before Alexander became sick. The plan had always been to make Alexander sick, to create a condition that would justify his removal as CEO while allowing Marcus to position himself as the natural successor. But the most devastating discovery came from Emma, who'd been reviewing old security footage with the investigator. "Mr. Sterling," she said during their evening phone call, her voice small and scared, "I found something bad." "What is it, Emma? Remember how you said you started feeling sick about 18 months ago? I looked at the security videos from back then. The first time you got really sick, the day you went to the hospital and got diagnosed, it was after a company party, a celebration for some big deal." Alexander remembered. The merger with Biogen Technologies, a $3 billion deal that had taken 2 years to finalize. They'd celebrated with champagne and catered food in the executive dining room. "Marcus gave a toast," Emma continued, "and he handed you a special glass of champagne. He made a big deal about it being a vintage bottle, something expensive. You drank it, and then—" Her voice cracked. "6 hours later, you were in the hospital. That's when it started, Mr. Sterling. That's when you first couldn't feel your legs. Alexander felt ice flood his veins. The first dose. Not in his medication, but in champagne at a celebration. Marcus had looked him in the eye, smiled, and handed him poison while everyone applauded. "Emma," Alexander said quietly, "I need you to send that video to my lawyer. Can you do that?" "Already did," Emma said. "Mr. Sterling, how could someone be that mean? How could he smile and talk nice and be poisoning you at the same time?" It was a question Alexander had been asking himself for days. "Some people care more about power than they do about people," he said finally. "They convince themselves that what they want is more important than anyone else's life or happiness. It's not an excuse. It's just the sad truth about certain kinds of evil." "I'm glad you're not like that," Emma said softly. "I'm trying not to be," Alexander replied. "Your mother asked me something the other day. She said, 'What kind of man do you want to be when this is over?' And I realized I'd spent so long being the kind of man who succeeds that I'd forgotten to be the kind of man who cares." Thursday brought a surprise visit. Alexander was in physical therapy. His legs were getting stronger every day, his coordination improving, the nerve damage slowly healing now that the poison had been purged from his system. When his phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice was elderly, refined and vaguely familiar. "This is Harold Kemp. I'm on your board of directors." Alexander tensed. Harold Kemp was one of the longest-serving board members, a man who'd known Alexander's father and had been there since the company's founding. If Marcus had turned him, the upcoming board meeting would be even more of a battle than expected. "Mr. Kemp, what can I do for you?" "I'm calling to apologize," Kemp said bluntly. "Marcus Webb came to me 6 months ago with concerns about your health. He showed me medical reports, painted a picture of a man losing his grip on reality, suggested that for the good of the company, we needed to start planning succession. I believed him. I helped him recruit other board members to his position. And I was wrong." Alexander said nothing, waiting. "I should have come to you directly," Kemp continued. "Should have asked you face to face what was happening instead of listening to gossip and manufactured evidence. I've spent 40 years in business, and I let myself be manipulated by a man a third my age because it was easier than asking hard questions. That's on me." "Why are you telling me this?" Alexander asked. "Because there's going to be a vote at Monday's board meeting. Not about your fitness to serve, that's off the table now, but about whether Marcus's supporters should be allowed to remain on the board, or if they should be removed for their role in the conspiracy. I'm voting to remove them, even if it means removing myself." Alexander felt a grudging respect for the old man's integrity. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Kemp. Don't appreciate it yet. I have one more thing to say." Kemp's voice hardened. "That little girl who saved your life, Emma Martinez. I heard the other board members talking about her, making jokes about how a child had outsmarted a room full of executives. They were laughing, Mr. Sterling. Laughing at their own embarrassment instead of recognizing what her intelligence represents. What does it represent? The future. Not the future of business necessarily, but the future of humanity. That child saw patterns, made connections, and had the courage to act when she had every reason to stay silent. She's 7 years old, and she has better judgment than half the CEOs I know. If we're smart, if you're smart, you'll make sure she and children like her have every opportunity to succeed, because that's where innovation comes from. Not from people like me who've been in boardrooms for 40 years, but from people who see the world differently." After they hung up, Alexander sat in the therapy room, processing the conversation. Harold Kemp was right. Emma wasn't just a smart kid who'd gotten lucky. She represented something the business world desperately needed: perspective from outside the echo chamber of privilege and power. Friday afternoon, Alexander called Emma with news that made her squeal with delight. "I've been talking to your principal," he said. Sterling Pharmaceuticals is going to fund a new gifted program at your school. New computers, advanced curriculum, field trips to museums and universities, everything. And you're going to help design it. Me? But I'm just a kid. You're the exact person who should design it. You know what smart kids need, because you are one. What do you think would have helped you most over the past few years? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. More books, she said finally. Books about everything. Science, history, math, stories. And people who don't treat you weird for being smart. Sometimes kids make fun of me for reading too much or knowing too many big words. It makes you not want to be smart anymore. Alexander felt a pang in his chest. How many brilliant children dulled themselves down to fit in? How much potential was wasted because being smart wasn't cool? Then we'll make it cool, he promised. We'll celebrate intelligence instead of hiding it. We'll show that being smart is just as valuable as being athletic or artistic or anything else. Mr. Sterling? Emma's voice turned serious. Are you scared about Monday, about the board meeting? A little, Alexander admitted, but I'm also ready. Marcus tried to take everything from me, but he failed. And now I get to rebuild, not just my health, but my company's integrity. That's not scary, that's exciting. Good, Emma said firmly, because you're a good person, and good people should win sometimes. If only the world worked that way, Alexander thought. But maybe, with enough effort and the right allies, he could make it work that way in his own corner of the world. Saturday morning, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 18 months. He walked into Sterling Pharmaceuticals without his wheelchair. He still needed his cane, his gait was unsteady, and he had to rest every 20 feet. But he walked, through the lobby, past the security desk, into the elevator, down the hallway to his office. Every employee he passed stopped and stared. Some applauded. Some had tears in their eyes. They'd all believed he was dying, and now here he was, walking, recovering, alive. In his office, Alexander stood at the window and looked out at the city. Monday's board meeting would determine not just his future, but the future of everyone who worked here. Would they continue as a company that valued profit over people? Or could they become something better? His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. My mama says I should tell you to rest this weekend. She says you need to save your strength for Monday. She's probably right. Mamas usually are. Alexander smiled and typed back, Tell your mama thank you. And Emma, thank you for believing in me when no one else did. The response came quickly. You believed in me first. That's what friends do. Friends. A 7-year-old girl and a 38-year-old billionaire, bridging a gap that society said shouldn't be bridgeable. But they had bridged it, and in doing so, they'd both become better people. Sunday evening, the night before the board meeting, Alexander sat in his penthouse and wrote a speech. Not the kind of speech executives usually gave, not dry and corporate and safe, but the kind of speech that told the truth. The truth about betrayal and recovery, about a little girl who saved his life, about the invisible people in every organization who notice things that executives miss, about the kind of company he wanted to build going forward, one that valued human beings over quarterly profits, integrity over convenience. It was risky. Some board members would hate it. Some would call him soft, emotional, unfit to lead. But Alexander was done playing by rules written by people like Marcus Webb. Tomorrow he would tell the truth. And whatever happened after that, at least he'd know he'd tried to do the right thing. His phone rang. Emma, calling from her closet hideout like always. Mr. Sterling, I just wanted to say good luck tomorrow. You're going to do great. I hope so, Alexander said. I've been thinking, Emma. After all this is over, after everything settles down, would you and your mother like to have dinner? Not at a fancy restaurant or anything formal, just dinner as friends. Like a real dinner? Emma sounded awed. Not just phone calls? Like a real dinner. I want to get to know you better, not as the girl who saved my life, but as Emma. As a person, I'd like that, Emma said softly. I'd like that a lot. After they hung up, Alexander sat in the darkness of his penthouse and thought about second chances. Most people didn't get them. Most people who were poisoned died. Most conspiracies succeeded. Most children who tried to warn adults were ignored. But somehow, against all odds, he'd been given a second chance at life, and he was determined not to waste it. Tomorrow would bring challenges, confrontations, difficult decisions. But tonight, for the first time in 18 months, Alexander Sterling felt like himself again, strong, clear-headed, ready to fight, and grateful beyond words for a little girl with a notebook full of crayon drawings, and more courage than anyone he'd ever known. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter day where the sun turned Manhattan's skyscrapers into towers of ice and gold. Alexander Sterling stood in front of his bathroom mirror, straightening his tie with hands that barely trembled. He'd chosen his favorite suit, the navy one his father had bought him when Alexander made his first million. In the reflection, he could see both the man he'd been 18 months ago and the man he'd become, stronger, humbler, and infinitely more grateful. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma sent at 6:47 a.m. before school. Remember to stand up straight and talk loud. You're going to be amazing. I believe in you. Alexander smiled, pocketed his phone and picked up his cane. Time to face the board. The Sterling Pharmaceuticals boardroom occupied the entire 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered 360-degree views of Manhattan. Alexander had always loved this room. It felt like standing on top of the world. Today, it felt like a battlefield. The board members were already assembled when Alexander walked in. Walked, not wheeled. The statement was intentional, undeniable. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but every step proclaimed his recovery. 12 faces turned toward him. Harold Kemp nodded respectfully. 3 board members looked genuinely pleased. 5 others, Marcus's supporters, looked varying degrees of uncomfortable, angry, or afraid. The last member, Catherine Park, Sterling's lead counsel, watched with professional neutrality. "Gentlemen, ladies." Alexander took his seat at the head of the table, setting his cane aside carefully. "Thank you for attending on short notice. I know the events of the past week have been unprecedented." "That's one word for it," said James Morrison, a Marcus ally. "Another word might be scandalous. The media is having a field day with this poisoning story, Alexander. Our stock price has dropped 15%. Because our CFO was arrested for attempted murder," Alexander replied calmly. "I'd say that's a reasonable market response." "Be that as it may," Morrison continued, "the question before this board is how we move forward. Marcus Webb is gone, but the concerns he raised about leadership stability remain valid. You've been absent or impaired for 18 months. The company needs the truth," Alexander interrupted, "which is what I'm here to provide." He opened his laptop and connected it to the boardroom's projection screen. "What I'm about to show you has already been provided to federal prosecutors and the SEC. I'm sharing it with you not because I need your permission to continue as CEO, I have voting control of this company through my shareholdings, but because you deserve to know exactly what happened here." The screen lit up with a photograph of Marcus Webb handing Alexander a champagne glass. The timestamp read 6:23 p.m., 18 months ago. "This is the moment I was first poisoned," Alexander said quietly. "That champagne contained a neurotoxin that began the process of paralyzing me. Over the following weeks, Dr. Richard Harding, a neurologist hired and paid by Marcus Webb, diagnosed me with a fake condition and prescribed medications that were actually a sophisticated poison designed to slowly destroy my nervous system." He clicked to the next slide. Phone records between Marcus and Dr. Harding, showing hundreds of calls over 3 years. The goal was to make me so sick that I'd either die or be forced to step down, allowing Marcus to assume control as interim CEO. He spent 3 years planning this, 3 years building relationships with board members, positioning himself as the natural successor, and preparing to steal this company out from under me. "This is very serious," Catherine Park said carefully. "But Alexander, how did you discover the truth?" Alexander smiled. "I'm glad you asked." He clicked to a new slide, a photo of Emma Martinez taken with her permission, showing her holding her worn notebook. "This is Emma Martinez. She's 7 years old. Her mother, Rosa Martinez, works as a member of our cleaning staff. Emma would come to the building after school and wait for her mother to finish work. During that time, she observed me. She noticed patterns in my condition, that I got worse after taking my medication, that my tremors increased after certain people visited. She researched the medications and discovered that the chemical combinations were toxic, not therapeutic." The boardroom was silent. "Emma Martinez saved my life," Alexander continued. "A 7-year-old girl noticed what an army of doctors, executives, and board members failed to see. She had the courage to approach me and tell me to stop taking my medicine. And when she realized I was in danger, she helped me gather evidence and ultimately called the police that prevented Marcus Webb from killing me in my own office." He clicked to the final slide, a photo of Emma and Rosa smiling together. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something fundamental about what went wrong at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. We became a company where a 7-year-old girl could see the truth more clearly than our board of directors. We became so focused on hierarchy, credentials, and status that we stopped noticing the people around us. We stopped listening to voices that came from unexpected places." Alexander stood, gripping the table for support. "That changes today. Effective immediately, I'm implementing new policies across Sterling Pharmaceuticals. First, we're establishing an ethical oversight committee with the power to investigate any concerns about patient care, research integrity, or corporate conduct. This committee will include representatives from all levels of the company, including custodial and support staff." James Morrison looked outraged. "You're putting janitors on an oversight committee?" "I'm ensuring that people who see things others miss have a voice," Alexander corrected. "Emma's mother works in every corner of this building. She sees things I never would. That perspective is valuable, and we've been idiots to ignore it." He continued, "Second, we're establishing the Emma Martinez Foundation for Overlooked Brilliance. Sterling Pharmaceuticals will provide $100 million in initial funding to identify and support exceptionally intelligent children from low-income families. We'll provide scholarships, mentorship, resources, everything needed to ensure that economic circumstances don't limit potential." Harold Kemp was nodding. "That's admirable, Alexander, but some will argue it's not our business to fund social programs." "Then they don't understand how innovation happens," Alexander shot back. "The breakthroughs that will define our future won't come from people who went to the same schools and think the same thoughts. They'll come from people who see the world differently. Emma Martinez saw what we couldn't because she had a different perspective. That's not a liability, that's an asset. And any company smart enough to cultivate diverse perspectives will have a competitive advantage." He looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "Third, and most importantly, I'm asking each of you to make a choice. Marcus Webb cultivated supporters on this board by promising influence, profit, and power. 5 of you took his side against me without ever asking for my perspective or investigating his claims. I understand why. It was easier, more convenient, more advantageous politically. But convenience isn't leadership, and I won't work with a board that values convenience over integrity." The room erupted. Morrison and 2 others began shouting about contracts and voting rights. Harold Kemp banged his fist on the table, calling for order. Catherine Park took notes with a slight smile. Alexander waited for the noise to subside. "I'm not firing anyone. But I am asking those who supported Marcus's conspiracy, actively or through willful ignorance, to voluntarily resign. I'll provide generous exit packages, excellent references, and my gratitude for past service. But going forward, Sterling Pharmaceuticals needs board members I can trust, people who ask hard questions, people who have the courage to stand up to me when I'm wrong. People, he added, who understand that a 7-year-old girl was braver and smarter than most of us in this room, and who want to build a company worthy of her example. Silence fell. Long, heavy, uncomfortable silence. Finally, James Morrison stood. "I'm out." "You've lost your mind, Sterling. This company is going to fall apart without experienced leadership." "Then I'll rebuild it with inexperienced leadership that has integrity," Alexander replied calmly. Morrison stormed out. 2 others followed. That left 9 board members, including 3 empty seats that would need to be filled. Harold Kemp cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Alexander, I think you're making the right call. This company needed a reckoning. I just wish it hadn't taken a poisoning to bring it." "So do I," Alexander said softly. "But we can't change the past. We can only build a better future." The rest of the meeting was procedural, approving the new policies, discussing the search for a new CFO, reviewing the media strategy. But the important work was done. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had been given a second chance, just like Alexander himself. As the board members filed out, Catherine Park lingered. "That was quite a speech, very different from your usual style." "I'm a different person than I was 18 months ago," Alexander admitted. "Dying tends to change your perspective." "You didn't die," Catherine pointed out. "No, but I would have, if not for Emma." Alexander looked at the photo still displayed on the screen. The bright-eyed 7-year-old with too much intelligence and more courage than anyone had a right to ask of her. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if she'd been a different kind of kid. If she'd been too scared to speak up or too conditioned to respect authority, or if I'd been too proud to listen to a child. Any of those things. And Marcus wins. I die or get pushed out, and he steals everything. But that didn't happen," Catherine said gently. Emma spoke up. "You listened. And now you have a chance to do something meaningful with your second chance at life." After she left, Alexander sat alone in the boardroom and pulled out his phone. He'd promised Emma he'd text her after the meeting. "It's over. We won. Thank you for everything." Her response came immediately. "Yay! Mama says we can celebrate with ice cream after dinner. You should have ice cream too." Alexander laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I'll do that. Thank you, Emma, for believing in me, for saving my life, for reminding me what's important." "You're welcome. You're a good person, Mr. Sterling. Don't forget that." That evening, Alexander kept his promise about dinner. Rosa and Emma Martinez arrived at his penthouse at 6:30 p.m., both dressed in their nicest clothes, which were still modest, worn, clearly bought second-hand. Alexander had considered taking them to a 5-star restaurant, but Emma had asked if they could just have pizza and talk, and honestly, that sounded perfect. They sat in Alexander's living room, Rosa still visibly uncomfortable in such luxurious surroundings, Emma fascinated by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city spread out below. "I can see our apartment from here," Emma exclaimed, pressing her nose against the glass. "Look, Mama, that's our building." Rosa joined her daughter at the window, and Alexander saw her expression shift as she realized the vast distance between their worlds, not just the physical miles, but the wealth, opportunity, and possibility that separated a billionaire's penthouse from a working-class apartment building. "Mrs. Martinez," Alexander said quietly, "I meant what I said about the job offer, head of facilities management. I need someone who knows this company from the ground up, who notices things others miss, who has the integrity to speak up when something's wrong. That's you." Rosa turned, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, I clean toilets." I don't know how to manage people or write reports or do whatever facility managers do. You raised Emma, Alexander pointed out. You worked 2 jobs to provide for her, kept her in school, encouraged her intelligence instead of crushing it. You're the definition of a good manager, someone who helps others become their best selves. The rest is just technical details we can teach you. Why? Rosa asked, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this? You already paid us. You already thanked us. Why keep giving? Alexander thought about how to answer. Because Emma didn't just save my life. She reminded me why I started this company in the first place. My father died of cancer when I was 14. I watched him suffer, watched the treatments fail, watched the system that should have protected him fail. I built Sterling Pharmaceuticals to save people like him, to create medications that actually worked, to put patient care over profit. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that mission. I got caught up in wealth and power and proving myself. I became someone my father wouldn't have been proud of. Emma brought me back to who I was supposed to be. That's worth more than any amount of money I could pay you. Emma had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. Mr. Sterling, are we really friends, or are you just being nice because I helped you? Alexander smiled. Do you want to know the truth? Always. The truth is, I started out feeling grateful. But these past few weeks, talking with you every night, hearing your observations about the world, watching you figure things out, I realized you're one of the most interesting people I've ever met. You're 7 years old and you already see patterns most adults miss. So yes, Emma, we're really friends. And I hope we stay friends for a very long time. Emma beamed, and in that moment Alexander saw the little girl behind the brilliant mind, the child who just wanted to be valued for who she was, not dismissed because of her age or her family's economic status. They had pizza. They talked about books and science, and what Emma wanted to be when she grew up, currently torn between doctor, detective, and astronaut. Rosa gradually relaxed, laughing at her daughter's enthusiasm and occasionally sharing stories about Emma's childhood adventures. As the evening drew to a close and Rosa gathered their things to leave, Emma hugged Alexander tightly. "Thank you for listening to me," she whispered. "Nobody ever really listens to kids. But you did. You believed me even when it sounded crazy." "Thank you for having the courage to speak up," Alexander replied. "You saved my life, Emma. But more than that, you reminded me what kind of person I want to be. That's a gift I can never fully repay." After they left, Alexander stood at his window, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere down there, in a modest apartment building, a 7-year-old girl was probably getting ready for bed, her worn notebook tucked under her pillow, dreaming of all the things she'd accomplish. And thanks to her, Alexander Sterling was alive to see it, to help make those dreams possible. To build a company and a foundation that would give kids like Emma the opportunities they deserved. He'd been given a second chance at life, and he was determined to spend it well. The story of the poisoned CEO and the child who saved him would make headlines for months. Books would be written, movies optioned. But for Alexander, the real story was simpler. A reminder that wisdom doesn't require age, courage doesn't require power, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can change everything. Emma Martinez had changed his world. Now it was his turn to change hers, and the world of every child like her who'd been told they didn't matter, couldn't help, shouldn't try. Because if a 7-year-old girl with nothing but a notebook and courage could bring down a corporate conspiracy and save a life, imagine what she could accomplish with resources, support, and people who believed in her. The future was bright. And for the first time in years, Alexander Sterling was excited to see it unfold.